Being at the stated hour, 1 o'clock, we call the Commission Governance Review Subcommittee into order. I would like to remind members of the public are advised that our meetings are webcast live by the City of Hamilton and temporarily archived on the city's website. Other individuals and the meeting may also be audibly or visually recording this meeting. As well, a reminder that all electronic devices are to be switched to a non-audible function during the committee meetings. I'm doing mine right now. Madam Clerk, are there any changes to the agenda?
No, Mr. Chair, there are no changes to the agenda.
We will require electronic vote to approve the agenda as presented. We have a move and second. Moved by Councillor Pearson, second by Councillor Ferguson. All those in favor? Passed. Declarations of interest? Seeing none. Approval of minutes, moved by Councillor Pearson, second by Councillor Clark. All those in favor? No communications, no delegation request, no consent items, public hearing delegations, none, and staff presentations, none. Discussion items. We do have 10.1, it's pretty self-evident in the report. If you read it, pregnancy and parental leave for members of council policy, and I believe the report talks about, I believe it's Bill 68. Moved by Councillor Pearson, second by Councillor Clark. Any questions? Seeing, okay. And before the vote, I need the screen up. Okay, who's on the speakers list? Lloyd.
My question is, if an employee goes off maternity leave, don't they get 12 months off where they can take 18 if they spread the cost over 12, or they can take 12 months salary and spread it over 18? And so the recommendation here is to come back with 20 weeks, but with full pay, where employees don't receive any pay. I guess they go on, if my information is right, they would go on unemployment insurance. Have I got all that right so far?
Yeah, so through the chair, I think that's a question for Laura. If you can repeat it, please. Great.
Did you hear the question, Laura, or do you want me to repeat it? Okay, so the occupational health, or not the occupational health, the Employment Standards Act requires that if someone goes on maternity or paternity leave, an employee, they get a year off, but they go on unemployment insurance, which would give them about 60% of their regular salary. Is that right?
So through the chair, actually, someone that goes on a maternity leave now with the recent changes to the ESA have 18 months.
Yeah, but they spread the salary over, or the UIC
yes,
payments
it's
over 12.
spread over, yes, over the 18 months.
Yeah, they're
It's,
12 months over 18 months.
Yes, and it's 55% the ESA, and then I think they cap it at a certain level.
So here
400 or
with
500.
members of council, and I'm not saying I disagree with this, I just want to make sure that we're following proper procedure, and I'm sure you are, is that it's 20 weeks with pay. So why do you go from 18 months to 20 weeks, and why is it with pay and others are not?
I'm not sure, is that a detail that, that's provided in the report? The absence, the maternity leave would be for the 18 months, potentially, if that's the choice of the individual going off on maternity leave.
It's also addressing parental leave as well.
And parental leave, yes.
There's 20 consecutive weeks on our policy, the draft policy that's before us.
Through the chair, the Bill 68 included an amendment to the Municipal Act whereby a member of council no longer required a resolution of council to grant an extended leave of absence.
That's fine.
Okay, if the absence is related to pregnancy or parental leave for 20 consecutive weeks or less.
Well, this is provincial legislation then. It's not something that our staff have come forward as a recommendation to us.
That is correct.
Do you know the logic of that? Why 20 weeks and, no? Do other municipalities have the similar policy?
Through the chair, yes, they do. We're required to have this policy in place.
Okay, thank you.
Councilor Mayor Pierce.
Thank you. I just wanted to ask the question that on page, sorry, it's not listed, 3.14 of the policy, just says council may make temporary appointments. I just want to be sure, so if these appointments on any of the subcommittees are paying appointments, how does that work? And is there, it's not intended that a council member can be replaced at the council table, is that correct?
Through the chair, that is correct. It's just members of council replacing the member who's off on leave, a temporary basis.
So it has to be somebody on council, it wouldn't be a matter of, similar to when we had to fill in for a council who had been elected at a higher level, and we had that temporary fill-in, it wouldn't be that situation.
No, it would not be that situation.
Thank you very much.
Clark?
So, just to clarify, this is not a city-initiated policy. It is required by the province that this policy be put in place, and is required by the province that it's 20 weeks, and is required by the province that they get full pay for the 20 weeks. That sum it up?
Through the chair, yes, that does sum it up.
Thank you.
Thank you. So it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor? Carried. Motions, 11.1. Now, I'm not clear it's a motion. It was a motion at council. It was referred to the governance committee. So it's here for information and decision. Right? Is that correct, Madam Clerk? So I'm going to relinquish the chair, and I'm going to ask Councillor Clark if you can take over as the chair. Now, the motion, there's two components to it. Let's deal with the first one, the easiest one. There was a significant budget allowance for Ward 7 and 8 in the past term at council. There's dollars left over in that account that's a legislative budget. So the motion just says, let's divide that differential amongst the 15 wards. And I think it comes out to 11,000 per ward, if I'm correct. Is that, John?
So through the chair, that's part of B, right? So in old Ward 7 and 8, there was 2 additional admin support for 177,000. So the therefore be it resolved was to allocate that 177,000 across all 15 wards. Yep. Through the chair on a one-time basis.
Thank you. Councillor?
So I just want to make, so if we can make a decision on that, then I'll move on to the next possibility.
So you want them to be severed?
Correct.
Okay, so we normally we'll sever them when we actually deal with the entire resolution, or you want them severed right now?
Well, since it's really not, it's here for us to take action, it's really not a motion form. I'm not sure why, because this motion was referred to this committee for its, for their consideration.
So I look to the clerk for assistance.
Through the chair, we can separate them individually and vote on them separately and then go from there.
Okay. So we need a mover for B then.
I move it.
Moved by Councillor Whitehead, seconded by Councillor Pearson. Any further discussion on B? Seeing none, all those in favor? Electronic vote, please. B is carried. Councillor?
Thank you. And the other one was very convoluted, so I'm just going to make it pretty straightforward. Every year, there's a surplus that comes back from the legislative budget. So the idea was that surplus be put into a reserve designated for the following year to be again distributed amongst to provide additional support for the 15 wards. So it's going to be divided evenly based on whatever the surplus is on any given year for the following year.
But the resolution doesn't talk about the surplus.
Oh, that's why I didn't want to deal with this resolution, because this is off the mark. It made it too complex. So the replacement is that any surplus from a year, then the following year, that surplus would be divided amongst the 15 wards, equally.
Any surplus out of the legislative budget would be divided amongst the wards in the following year? Is that what I'm hearing?
Correct. That's the proposal.
Do you have any other questions of staff, Councillor?
Brian?
So through the chair, so as I apologize, Brian and I were just discussing the mechanics of what is before you, is it would be subject to the year-end report, and if at year-end the legislative budget had a surplus, that staff report back through the year-end disposition on the option of transferring that surplus to a legislative reserve. I don't believe we have a legislative reserve, so we would have to create a legislative reserve. Those funds would go to the legislative reserve, and each year those would be allocated as a one-time, because again, what you are considering is potential year-end surpluses, and you would not know if there is a potential year-end surplus until year-end. So again, the direction would be that it would require the creation of a legislative reserve, and through the year-end disposition report, that staff report back on the option of transferring a legislative surplus to the legislative reserve.
Thank you, sir. Councillor?
So that's the comment. So there's no impact on the levy. It's taking what's already in place. Obviously, our legislative budgets don't grow at the same level as others, and it's been pretty actually stagnant. Yet the demand on many ward councillors' offices, as you can appreciate, has increased dramatically with the advent of social media and a lot more phone calls coming in offices and a lot more challenges. So with those additional pressures, and I have consulted with many councillors, and they've all indicated that there's additional pressures, that they needed the additional dollars. And then, of course, mailing is always a problem when you're trying to set up meetings that you're very limited in what you can access in regards to the budgets. The budgets aren't adequate for many. So this would just help. It may not get us all the way there, but it certainly help.
So to be clear for the clerk and the councillors, A would be deleted and replaced with a surplus, et cetera. Okay, understood. Thank you. I have a speaker's list. Anything else, Councillor Whitehead? Thank you. Councillor Pearson, please, if you could put her mic on.
Thank you, and I appreciate the, certainly the recommendation going forward. I just want to ask a couple of questions, though, to Brian or Mike. Is under the legislative budget, it's not just all of council, though, because this could also be other department stuff that comes into the picture that's not our savings. Is that correct?
So through the chair, that's correct. Within legislative includes a mayor's office. So if it was to be specific to the ward office budgets within the legislative budget. So if this was specific to the ward office budgets, it would have to be narrowed to that, the ward office budgets within the legislative budget.
So it's just, so there's only the ward budgets that are in there now and the mayor. So is there not a line item that also refers to clerks, any works in the clerk's department?
So through the chair, there is a legislative general and a volunteer committee. I believe in part the legislative general is leveraged from time to time as it relates to, for instance, international events where there is a councillor representing the city as it relates to their expenses to attend that international event, like a children's festival internationally. So from time to time, through a motion, council approves leveraging a portion of that budget. So again, if the objective was to be specific to any potential year-end surpluses for the ward budgets, again, the language should be narrowed to ward budgets within the legislative budget.
Thank you for that, and I'll leave direction for the mover of the motion and possibly, and whether you want to factor in the mayor's office as well. I just want to be sure that no one else in the legislative department, they're being shorted because we're now taking all of the surplus, and that's not fair that they've saved the money and we're taking it. Okay, so I want to be sure of that. Do we have a ballpark idea of what the surplus is on an annual basis from the wards?
Through the chair, the average over the last 4 years is about $250,000.
Okay, thank you for that, and I'll leave it then to.
Can I answer that one question, Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I talked to the mayor's office. He's fine.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Councillor Ferguson is next on the list, please. Can you put his mic on, please?
So the A has been changed. I think the chair clarified that. It's been deleted and been replaced with year-end surpluses. My concern about this is the thrust of the motion was all about getting additional help in our wards with all the extra workload that we're experiencing. And this doesn't give any degree of certainty that you're gonna get it, so how are you gonna be able to hire staff? You know, if you're gonna put an extra staff person, you gotta lay them off the next year if there's no year-end surpluses, and so, you know, you don't get any consistency, which is critical in dealing with the public, because when my office gets inquiries, Kathy knows exactly who to call and to try to resolve it. If she can't, then she'll come back to me. Where if you're hiring a new staff person midway through the year or laying them off midway through the year because you don't have any surpluses, it doesn't create a staffing consistency. And so I'm personally having trouble with this because I don't know how we could run our ward offices or ward budgets with that kind of arrangement. And it just seems awkward, so. I'll see what my colleagues have to say. Or Mike, do you have anything to add to that?
So, so through the chair, no, I appreciate the question, and we identified this as an issue as well, as just recognizing that there be a bit of a disconnect with respect to this option relative to our budget process, in that our budget process is calendar year. Our year-end process is typically April, so if committee were to support what is before you, you really would be looking at an April to April funding commitment. It would be one time, what I'll label as one time, because it would be subject to a year-end surplus. So I understand it would be limiting in that if this related to human resources, I'm assuming it would be contractual to the term.
Counselor?
Okay, and I got mixed feelings on this. And Kathy's told me she's going to retire, and I told her she can't. And but if she does, and you know, I'm going to be in a bit of a box. So I'd like to get her back a couple days a week just to provide some continuity over to the new person. And the original A would do that, would allow me to do that, where this doesn't, because I got no element of certainty. So I don't know what I'm going to do. I'm going to see what my colleagues say. Thanks.
Mr. Chair.
Counselor Whitehead, you had a response?
Yeah, so I did talk to a number of councillors. No one is up to going to the levy. Although people, many councillors I talked to said a full-time, part-time staff person, additional staff person would be ideal. But it was clear that there wasn't consensus around the horseshoe. So it was really dealing with what resources are there. The second piece is this would, with predictability, at least allow you to extend a one-year contract. So once it was established that there was a surplus, and then once it was established that there was enough in your account, you can do a year-to-year contract to supplement that part-time person in the office. It's not ideal, no question about it, but it does provide the opportunity if the surpluses are there. Those are my comments.
Okay, just some quick comments and questions. So the current process, I guess to Mr. Zagaric, and I didn't want to relinquish the chair because all the mics are going to, we want to just put all the mics on. The counselor is being frugal and doesn't spend the money, then it goes into the fund for the end of the year, and other counselors get to spend that money. So there seems to be a counterintuitive, what's the incentive to save money if those who are spending the money, and I'm not saying in any way, shape, or form disparagingly that it's frivolous spending or not, it's legitimate spending, but they're spending their maximum. They now get bonus for spending the max, and the counselor, he or she who has been frugal, is basically paying for that extra. So it just doesn't, I understand what some of the counselors are saying, but it seems counterintuitive.
So through the chair, conceptually, what is before you is pooling, essentially pooling the legislative surpluses. Again, if the intent was to earmark those surpluses back to the respective wards, that would be an option. What we have had past experience, we've had some wards who've had in-year challenges or issues, and I recall wards 1 and 2 where council has supported leveraging the tax stabilization reserve for, I believe, 2 years to assist them as it relates to some of the pressures that they had in their wards. So there has been a precedent in the past to support through the tax stabilization reserve. And I just will point out that surpluses go to the tax stabilization reserve. So indirectly, you were directing surpluses to specific wards where they had in-year pressures.
So the item A as written, it could proceed and you'd be 43,000 per ward minus the almost $1,200, or 12,000, correct? If we're taking out the money that was allocated through Ward 7 and 8 and spreading it across all of the other ones, so that would seem to be a credit towards the 45,000 per ward. Am I reading that right? If we're netting it out.
So through the chair, if I understand the question, if you're netting B against A,
Yes.
that would create a difference of about $34,000. And currently, if you were to distribute 250,000, again, just taking the four-year average across 15 wards, I'm going to guess that's probably 17,000, 16,000. So you would still have a gap. If the target was to arrive at 45,000, taking the $250,000 equally across 15 wards gives you 16,000, and what committee supported through Part B represents 11,000. So you're about $27,000 towards the $45,000 identified in A.
And so if we went with A, which would give the continuity as which Councillor Ferguson was speaking to, of the 0.5 FTE, the cost would be realistically 45 per ward. Forget about the differences in the budget, it's the same thing. And any surplus at the end of the year from the ward budget would go where?
So through the chair, is the question, what is our current practice as it relates to
Yes.
surpluses? So through the chair, through the disposition reports, we identify if there are any unplanned events. Surpluses go to those unplanned events, excluding boards and agencies. As it relates to library, police, their surpluses accrue to those agencies. Our capital accrues back to our capital program, an unallocated capital program. And exclusive of any in-year pressures, the balance of the surplus has gone typically to the tax stabilization reserve. What we had to do in 17, because of the status of some of our development charge reserves, we transferred $8 million to our development charge reserves because of some challenges in those reserves. But typically, it goes to our tax stabilization reserve.
So what is preventing the city and council from moving forward with option A as written and then designating any surplus to create a ward budget reserve that would have policies attached to it for, I'm thinking, significant mailing that has to go out because of, Alfrida, or whatever the case is, something unusual in the ward that occurs that the councillor has to find the budget for. It could be human relations for all, human resources for all I know. I can't predict everything, but things do pop up.
So through the chair, that is an option, is, as I mentioned previously, to create a legislative or ward office reserve. If the intent is to be a little narrower than legislative, it could be a ward office reserve. The purpose could be aligned to the guidelines for ward offices. Council is aware there are guidelines as to what the ward office budgets can be applied to, and the purpose of that reserve could be aligned to those guidelines.
So to HR, what happens if a councillor, I'll use Councillor Ferguson as an example, just hypothetically, he has had a long time serving legislative assistant or executive assistant, whatever the title is, and he retires, does that executive assistant get a payout because they're not being utilized somewhere else in the city? And how big a payout would that be, and would it have to come out of that ward's budget?
So through the chair, in the event that, a counselor retires or leaves or is no longer in a situation of employing the administrative position, that individual would be entitled to a severance, barring any other opportunity for that individual within the city. The severance would be reflective of their circumstances, which would be their age, their service, the positions, other positions held. So that, again, that's subject to common law.
And in some cases, I'm thinking at least of a half dozen assistants that are sitting around the table, those payouts could be rather significant. Would they come out of the ward budget? Because the ward budget wouldn't necessarily have all that money. You know,
The
if you're
chair,
looking at
no.
a 12-week
Yes.
payout or a 14-week payout,
Yeah, through the chair, no, and the short answer is because that is not how the ward budgets are structured. The ward budgets are structured for a normal year, or what I'll describe as a normal year, so as it relates to potential impacts such as maternity leaves or terminations or someone exiting the organization, that's not how we structure the ward budgets around those parameters. So under those circumstances, we would look to our corporate financial position, such as through our year-end disposition report I had described previously. So we wouldn't turn to the ward office budgets to offset those pressures. Again, because they aren't structured for those circumstances.
okay, those are all my questions. I'm kind of like with Councillor Ferguson. I like the idea of having some continuity so that we know very clearly upfront that we've got this amount of money to hire a part-time assistant to get us through the year. And I'm a little bit nervous about creating a system where it would come from a surplus that is unpredictable, and it could create other problems, dynamics for councillors who are frugal, and then the councillors who are spending more money end up getting that surplus. It just doesn't seem to make sense that way. So those are the sensitivities that I have around it. And I'll take the chair back, and Councillor Whitehead, please.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. I just want to highlight a couple of things. One, in our current budgets, there's an average. So if you have staff that have been here for a while and have more than 2 weeks holidays, it's not built into your budget, although it's coming out of your budget. The second piece is, so people, staff that have been here longer are not necessarily compensated on the current budget, so you're absorbing that cost. The second piece is pooling. So can't speak to the outlying areas, but I can tell you that in the area rating capital, if it was allocated on assessment and on taxes, Ward 7 and 8 would have received over $2 million on an annualized basis, yet we only received 1.4 or 1.6. It was equally distributed, even though in realistic terms, Ward 7 and 8, based on the assessment, should have had more, and if we just canceled the program, they would receive the $2.2 million in benefit, which they haven't received in all these years, and there was agreement to pool that. So there's always been this understanding and appreciation for everyone else's needs, and where pooling made sense, we applied it, and I just wanted to cite that example. So those are the two things. And Brian, if you can, what is the average we cover for holidays in our budgets?
Sorry, yeah, through the chair. Yeah, I don't remember specifically because it varied by ward, but it would, certainly. So 2 weeks coverage is allowed within the budget, the way it's established. But typically, depending on how long the staff has been here, vacations are much longer than that.
And so, just to be clear, the way it's structured currently, if a staff person is entitled to 5 weeks of holiday because of their time with the city, it comes out of the ward budget as 5 weeks of holiday?
So through the chair, the individual is budgeted at 100% of the salary, and so if they're away for 5 weeks, your budget allows for 2 weeks of coverage, not necessarily for the 5 weeks. Yeah, through backfilling.
So you lose the vacation, and then you also have to pay for someone to fill in for the vacation.
So through the chair, yeah, so the
With a
budget
budget
allows.
that doesn't contemplate that.
So through the chair, the budget accounts for an additional 2 weeks of coverage, not for the full 5 weeks.
So it covers for 2 weeks, doesn't cover you for the full time. I got it. Okay. Leave it to my colleagues. So where are we going, Counselor?
Well, the motion's on the table, and I want to make it clear that it's not the best result. I'd rather have something that is predictable, as good Councillor Ferguson indicated. But this is the next best thing. It's predictable at the year end when you get the surplus announced, and then you can figure out what you would receive and whether you can contract an additional part-time staff person for the year. Any other way of doing this with predictability means you have to go the levy. And that just didn't seem to get consensus with most of the councillors I talked to. So this is the best we can without going to the levy. So those are my comments.
So the motion is moved by yourself to delete A, it's an amendment, and replace A with a surplus from the legislative budget that will be equally divided in the subsequent year. Is that relatively, Mr. Garrick?
Through the chair, if I could suggest that it make reference to the ward office budgets unless the mayor's office is included in the intent. If the mayor's office is included, then it could be that the ward office budgets in the mayor's office budget, and it be equally distributed across the 15 ward office budgets in the mayor's office.
And so in that situation, then the surplus from the ward councillors could go to the ward, to the mayor's budget if he needs the extra money.
Was divided equally.
So through the chair, historically, the mayor's office has had a surplus, quick math would be on average about $80,000, $85,000. So if it were to be equally distributed, there would be a proportionate benefit to the ward offices.
So then the motion would read that the surplus generated from ward office budgets from the legislative budget will be divided equally in the subsequent year with the mayor and the councillors. Correct? Okay, so that would be the amendment, and it's moved by yourself. And do you have a seconder? Okay. Excellent. Councillor Pearson?
Thank you. Mike, sorry, just to clarify, and I know I'm probably getting confused on this. Surpluses now from our legislative budgets, do they not go in, they go into a reserve for legislative? It doesn't go to reduce the tax levy for the following year?
Through the chair, again, if there is a surplus net of any in-year pressures, the balance of the surplus on the operating side typically goes to the tax stabilization reserve, and the tax stabilization reserve is leveraged from time to time for potential in-year pressures.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Councillor Wilson, you're next.
My apologies to my colleagues and to staff. I was at a City Housing Hamilton meeting and thus I'm late. So
No problem, we understand.
I just, coming into this discussion now, through you, Mr. Chairman, to Brian or to Mike, have you given us a profile of the surplus or deficit position of each ward in this discussion and over the last number of years? So we get a sense of, just speaking to my predecessors, I was of the impression that we had no surplus, but thank you.
So through the chair, I don't believe we've disseminated to each of the counselors what the experience has been by ward for the previous term. I can tell you that through each of the year-end disposition reports, I don't recall a year where there was a deficit in the legislative budget. So,
Would you be able to tell me through you, Mr. Chair, what this, would you be able to provide that in terms of our year ends? And if not for everyone, at least for Ward 1?
So through the chair, Brian has a table we've been referring to this afternoon. The table shows the 2014 surpluses through to 2018 forecast surpluses, so we could provide that table by ward, as well as legislative general, mayor's office, and volunteer committees, because they represent a portion of the legislative budget.
Thank you. That would be helpful for me in understanding both the status of activity in Ward 1 and the value of this motion. Thank you.
I recall, Mr. Zagarek, there was one counselor that went over the budget and paid out of his pocket and then submitted a bill that ultimately the council refused to pay. So there was that one incident.
Through the chair, that's correct. That might have been 2 cycles or ago. And as I mentioned earlier, was I believe it was in 2014-15 that wards 1 and 2 were forecasting some in-year pressures, and at that time, council approved a allocation from tax stabilization at year end, if required, because of the policy that if a ward councillor exceeds their budget, the ward councillor personally has to mitigate that overage at year end.
Thank you. Anything else, Councillor Wilson?
Thank you. For example, in Ward 1, there has been a longstanding policy when my predecessors were here, and I'm carrying on in terms of this surplus situation, in that there are no promotional activities that are done by Ward 1 because the money just isn't there. And I just note with interest, the only budgetary item that was cut during this deliberation of ward budgets was that which the student population. So I'll just leave that to my colleagues to opine on.
Mr. Chair,
Thank you, Councillor.
clarification.
Sorry, Councillor Whitehead, sorry.
The other part of the question, you said there wasn't any surpluses. The average 4 years, because I didn't want to go that 1 year. The average, I think, Mike, you can repeat it, 4 years was 250,000?
Through the chair, that's correct. That's the average ward office surplus based on the last 4-year period.
So I just want to provide that as clarity. Thank you.
Which would still be under the half an FTE per ward.
Through the chair, if the $250,000 were to be distributed or shared equally across the 15 wards, in addition to Part B, which committee has already taken a position on, that would still leave a gap of about $18,000 per ward towards the $45,000 that would be required to support half an FTE.
Thank you. Councillor Pearson, please.
But actually, for the motion, I also want to clarify, is your intent that the dollars that go back to get divided into the 15 or 16 with the mayors, that it's only for administrative support, or can it be used for anything out of the ward budget?
Yes,
Mr. Whitehead, please.
I thought the cleanest way is to allow the council to determine what their priorities are, whether it's a mailing or whether it's a staff.
Thank you, that's what I wanted to get clarification on. And Mike, if I can just ask, what what feeds the tax stabilization account? So if this comes out, what other areas do we have going into it? Because this is an account we dip into a lot, and if we don't have this going into it, what else is going into it?
Through the chair, it's typically our year-end surpluses or any unconditional funding that would arrive to us through senior levels of government. But that has been very rare. So it's typically our year-end surpluses that contribute to our tax stabilization reserve.
What do we normally have in the tax stabilization reserve?
So through the chair, I believe our target is about $32,000 or $35,000. Sorry, 32 or $35 million. And
thank you.
Our we have some commitments through 2019 against the reserve, most notably the judicial inquiry. So we've committed $7 million to date against that reserve, subject to getting additional information and detail from the commissioner as it relates to the cost of that inquiry. And I believe that leaves a uncommitted reserve balance of about $3 million for 2019.
Okay. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Councillor Ferguson, please.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I probably have mixed feelings on this. We went through a ward boundary review to try to get everyone to have pretty much the same population. It was a painful process for us, but that was the intent, is to try to balance the population to get it very similar across the whole county. I know, similar to Councillor Wilson, I lost the student item because of the Redeemer, and but I gained 4 times the land mass, and not a huge population spike, about 4,000 or 5,000, but I find that they take up a lot of energy. Last week I had to drive out to Sheffield for something, and I got to go out to West Flamborough again this week. So it is sucking up a lot of time, but I always have trouble putting anything on the levy. I think you all know that. But I got mixed feelings on this thing. I just don't think that the surplus thing would work. I couldn't count on that, so you couldn't hire a 50% employee to assist you with administrative work because you don't know whether it's going to be there next year. And I'm blessed with someone who has a ton of experience, and to have someone new every year, depending what the number is, wouldn't be very helpful to me. So I've already got mixed feelings on this thing. I don't know which way to go on it, so I'll see what my colleagues do.
So as it stands right now, we have an amendment before us. It was moved by Councillor Whitehead, seconded by Councillor Pearson to get it on the floor. If the amendment fails, then item A would stand as it's written currently, which is what was sent back here for deliberation, correct? Okay. Any further comments? Then I'll call the vote on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment of replacing A? Sorry, Councillor Wilson? I will do my best. That the ward office budget surplus from the legislative budget be divided equally in the subsequent year. That would include the mayor's budget also. Councillor Wilson, anything further? Thank you. Councillor Pearson?
Okay, so I'm sorry, I'm indifferent on this as well. I think it takes a bit of time to kind of soak in as to what the effects are really going to be. But if this passes, we're looking at a surplus out of the councillor's legislative budget, about $250,000. And you said about 80,000 of the mayor, so about 300,000. So if this fails and we go back to A is 45,200 that is being asked for, correct? And that's about almost $700,000. Would you just clarify through chair?
So through the chair to the councillor's question, the councillor is correct in that the amendment that is before you would represent on average, based on historical experience, about $330,000, $250,000 from the ward office, historical average surplus, and approximately $80,000 from the mayor's office. Equally distributed, that would be about $22,000 per ward office and mayor's office. What is before you with respect to A would be a levy enhancement. So again, this was originally brought forward through the budget process. So the amendment is taking one-time funding each year through potential surpluses. The original A in the motion is a levy enhancement with a annualized impact of about $678,000.
Thank you for that. And so I do have a tremendous problem in saying going to the levy. I think there's a problem both ways, but I think it's more responsible if we just say whatever's saved out of all of the budget is split among the one for the following year. And every year that can change, which also means that this can also be a change in the recommendation going forward in future years. Thank you.
Yes, theoretically, if everybody spends their budget, there's no surplus. So, okay, we're still back to the amendment. So it's moved by Councillor Whitehead and seconded by Councillor Pearson. All those in favor of the amendment? And it's lost on a vote of 3-2. So then the main motion still stands, which is A, that an additional 0.5 FTE for administrative support at a gross cost of $339,000 or $22,600 per ward starting July 1st, 2019, and an annualized gross cost of $678,000 or $45,200 per ward be approved. Moved by Councillor Whitehead? No, you're not doing that? So is there a mover? Okay, so item A dies because there's no mover or seconder. I'll take the chair back to you.
Thank you. So we did achieve $11,000. Is it, Mike, per ward? Additional.
Through the chair, the allocation of the 177,000 represents about 11,800 per ward.
Annualized. And so the other two attempts, there's zero more dollars, just for clarification, but there's 11,000 that is at least being recommended here is going to go to council. And I know I talked to most councillors, they have no problem with it. So I'm quite comfortable that we can at least have that. Thank you very much. At this point, Madam Clerk, is there anything, we need the, excuse me, notice of motions. Any notice motions? Councilor Clark?
Sorry, I don't have a notice of motion, but I was asking for some clarification from staff on something. I don't know if you do it now or later on, or I'm in your hands.
Might as well do it now.
Okay. So I just wanted to clarify with the city clerk. I know we had talked about annualized reviews of the procedural bylaws. Will we be doing, what's the process going to be? Will there be some type of critical path, or as we go through the year, we find little snippets in the procedural bylaw that might need, my terminology, tweaking based on circumstances around the chamber? I'm assuming we're kind of collecting those, and then we'll have a meeting at some point to review all of that. Can I just get some clarification, please?
Through the chair, yes, we, on an ongoing basis, the clerk's office is collecting data regarding issues that have occurred at meetings, such as at council, the last council meeting where we didn't have anything in the procedural bylaw regarding the error in a vote. Okay, so that has now been put in that folder, that is something that we need to look at, and it will all be considered in a review by the end of the year. And we would amend the procedural bylaw for the term, like every year. And then at the end of the term, we would repeal and replace the procedural bylaw.
So would we, like the one that just happened, would we be modifying the procedural bylaw in year and then later on just fixing the overall procedural bylaw, is that correct?
That is correct.
Yeah, that actually answers the question, because I was wondering where the critical path was, you know, if we had to meet certain dates and all that. So in terms of public or civic engagement, if there's issues that they deem as inappropriate, they can raise that at any given time, goes into the folder, and then we'll eventually have a meeting here to talk about those issues, and then make recommendations on how we move forward, correct?
Yes, that is correct, like with the suggestions that Mr. Crutch made.
Yes,
They are in that folder already to be reviewed at the end of the year.
perfect. That helps a lot, thank you.
Thank you, and I'd just like to dovetail. Can we take a look at what the best practices are in the context of when a meeting is in process? The floor space where that meeting is taking place, what level of activity is allowed to take place while that meeting's ongoing? Can we take a look at other jurisdictions, see what they're doing in that case?
We can do that. We do have a provision in the procedural bylaw that nothing within the circle, or no one is allowed within the circle during a meeting.
Within arm's reach of the council, but the floor extends to the seats, so the question is, other than the people with disabilities, what activities that could impede, distract, the ongoing of or interfere with a meeting. There's some pretty strict rules, and I know I've looked at some of them already. They don't allow any movement during the meeting unless, of course, you're accommodating the people with disabilities. Other than that, so I just want to know what the best practices are, because it can be distracting.
Yes, we'll look at that. We do have the decorum at meetings that is with anyone who is attending the meeting, whether it's public, staff, and counselors. So we can look at that.
Thank you. So, general information, are there any general information, private, confidential, none? Motion to adjourn. Oh, sorry. Yeah, you're right, I do.
And just for information purposes, Mr. Chair, can we ask who the young lady is sitting beside Janet? Because I don't recall ever seeing her here before.
Through the chair, my name's Darren Earthy. I'm from Legal Services.
Thank you. Welcome.
Another lawyer.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm just, you tweaked, that's the word of the day. You tweaked not an idea, but an experience that I've had since being elected with respect to activity on the floor. I remember the additional meeting that we had and what informs a best practice and what we use to assess a best practice according to our values that we've set out here. During our second, it was the evening, I believe, development charges bylaw, I think. But there, for the first time that I have experienced, there were some young parents with children on the floor. I, for one, appreciated that activity and that presence because it was a statement of access and inclusion. And I trust the clerk in, if she is going to be, as you've asked her, to be looking at activity on the floor, that we look at it through that lens in terms of our desire to be inclusive and our EDI lens. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Clark?
I'm grinning because sometimes I don't even notice that there are kids here. They're so quiet and well-behaved, so. The selection committee process, does that selection committee process come through this committee, or how do we look at that process? Now that it's over, would we get a report back on how it went, how many people were interviewed, tweaks to the system that we might consider, or does that have to be initiated by the committee members of the council?
Through the chair, the selection process is within the reports that went to council at the end of the year with an overview of the committees and the committee listing, things like that. To have us report back on the number of individuals that were interviewed, how many individuals applied, we would need direction from the committee to report back.
And if we wanted to compare our selection process to other municipalities, would it come from this committee or audit and finance? I don't have anything planned right now. I'm trying to look to the future to understand the
Okay.
process.
I would put it through this committee.
This committee first. Okay, that works. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
Thank you. I have no other people on the speakers list, so I need a motion to adjourn. Moved by Councilor Pearson, second by Councilor Clark. All those in favor? Carried.